This week on Generating Alpha, I'm joined by none other than Kevin Hartz, co-founder of Eventbrite, co-founder of Zoom, and general partner at A-Star. An entrepreneur, an early-stage investor, Kevin has backed category-defining companies like Airbnb, Pinterest, and Uber, while building two startups from idea to IPO. His career spans the early PayPal days, pioneering digital remittances with Zoom, and transforming live events with Eventbrite. Over the last 2 decades, Kevin has navigated nearly every stage of the startup journey, from idea to IPO, from seed checks to billion-dollar valuations. He's worked alongside some of Silicon Valley's most influential figures, learned from legendary mentors, and built a reputation for spotting breakout founders before the rest of the world catches on. In our conversation, we cover how early political contrast shaped his contrarian streak and his time at Stanford building an early social networking platform while connecting him with future PayPal leaders. We discuss lessons from his mentors, the personal crisis that redirected his career, founding Zoom and Eventbrite, and his investment philosophy at A-Star. I really enjoyed making this episode, and I hope you guys enjoy listening. If you haven't already, I'd urge you to follow the podcast on Spotify and subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Thank you. Thanks, Kevin, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Amir.
I'd like to start where I always begin. Let's talk a little bit about your childhood and kind of your upbringing. So if I understand correctly, you grew up in a small town around the Bay Area, and then you also spent some time in Miami in your childhood. So give me a little bit of background. What was your childhood like? What was your upbringing like?
Yeah, idyllic childhood. Very lucky, very fortunate to be kind of born in upper middle class, waspy neighborhood in Orinda, California, which is in the East Bay of the Bay Area. The South Bay being, the famous Silicon Valley. I was kind of peripheral to that. For just 4 or 5 years, family went off. My dad took a job with a bank in Miami. My father's a retired attorney. He was general counsel for this bank for a few years. Great place to be a kid at, first grade through fourth, fifth grade. It's sunny all the time, warm weather, the beach, and we came back, and eventually I went to college but didn't go very far. I went to the South Bay, to Stanford. So that proximity, I'd say, how maybe there's some luck and fortune in everything, is that going to Stanford, grew up right, or I went to university right in kind of ground zero of all this exciting innovation that was happening.
And if I understand correctly, Orinda was a very Republican town during your kind of childhood, and you guys were the only Democrats, right?
Yeah, it was a good research there, Amir. We kind of call it like inland Orange County of sorts, after Orange County in Southern California. Like it was very Republican, and we joked about being the token Democrats, out in town. The irony is that I was out visiting just somewhat recently, and there was a Trump protest, and now apparently most Iranians are Democrats, and it's sort of flipped. So I don't know. I guess maybe we were early adopters or something.
Do you think kind of growing up in that environment helped you kind of adopt a contrarian mindset, or was it just,
Yeah,
like a
I think, like, while Arinda had these like very kind of wonderful like institutions, they were also very, um, kind of very traditional, and so it made it easy for me to kind of rebel against that. And um, I don't know. My friends used to say I was kind of a rebel without a cause, like in a tongue-in-cheek way. Um, but I think that's right. But I mean, I'm full of contradictions. On the one hand, I was an Eagle Scout. I um, went through and did these things and crossed old ladies across the street and things of that nature. But on the other hand, wanted to kind of shake up a lot of things.
Do you see those contradictions in your investing today?
Very, very much so. I mean, what immediately comes to mind, of course, is defense tech. We're building weapons, and that's a pretty heavy burden and something to be mindful of, and something, I could talk at length about. Um, and, maybe that really contradicts more of a pacifist mentality I have. Um, uh, but we could go on and on.
So you said you love school, you go off to Stanford, and there you build kind of an early Facebook-like platform. Just tell me about your experience there being in Stanford. If I understand, you met a lot of these incredible people in the student government there. And what were the core lessons or principles you took away from that experience?
Right. So Stanford at that time in the late 80s, early 90s was this sort of hotbed. It was really this sort of murmur before like the storm of this day, before the kind of massive storm of DEI. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I think I should just point out I've grown far more conservative today over these years, and especially with how the country has transformed. Um, I think there's a well-known quote attributed to a prime minister of England that, if my child was 18 and conservative, I'd call him heartless. But if he were 50 and not conservative, I'd call him brainless. And the notion there is you kind of see the pragmatism of life and how things are done. And I've certainly moved that way, but where I'm going with this is there's been a lot of like sort of radicalization of liberal ideals. You would say, for example, um, the treatment of Israel by the far left as imperial colonists, is one of these. And there's been action, in the current administration to try to shake this out of universities. That's what they're trying to get at, whether the right direction or not. A lot of these like kind of liberal ideals have kind of gone too far. This all kind of began in the late 80s, early 90s, where it was the beginning of affirmative action. And Peter Thiel came to campus in the late 80s and created the Stanford Review to speak out against this, speak out against the attempted changes against Western civilization track at Stanford. That was there was pressure to overhaul that, and it really was a reflection. It was like a warm up or a dress rehearsal. What came, just over the last 5 to 10 years was like a radical changes in things that we have, went through there. That's where I first met Peter. Reid Hoffman was there, Keith Rabois, and many other, David Sachs, and many others.
So Peter Thiel, Keith Boys, David Sachs, Reid Hoffman. How important would you say that peer group was to kind of in shaping your ambitions and overall your career trajectory?
Well, it turned out to be incredibly important. In that when I tended to get involved or engaged with projects around, this group and Peter, amazing things happened. And, I don't think anyone would have realized the massive historical impact that group, really has had on technology, on society, on thinking. And so, I think like if there's any lesson about this, when you see these really extraordinary people, kind of staying close to them and learning from them and being a part of that is a really good idea. I'll say I was fortunate to get involved in PayPal as an angel, and then started a company building on the PayPal API, the first developer on the PayPal API. That company went public and was acquired by PayPal, and started Eventbrite also at the time on the PayPal API. So those were my attempts to kind of stay close to these talented people.
And alongside of Peter Thiel, you've cited Pierre Lamond and Roelof Botha as kind of your key mentors. What are each of them like? How would you describe each of them? And what type of advice or guidance do you go to each of them for?
Well, Pierre is extraordinary. He's in his late 90s, still sharp as a tack, and uh, he was the co-founder of National Semiconductor. He's a physicist and a chip specialist, and then turned Sequoia partner with Don Valentine, a longtime Sequoia partner. And Pierre's just whip smart, and then has uh, a lot of kind of understanding of how businesses work. So he just intuitively, could tell you from experience which door number to go to. Um, as a CEO, he would always have me make my own recommendation and then challenge that, with different options. But the pattern recognition in Pierre is just extraordinary.
And what would you say about Peter and Roelof?
Roloff, Roloff was on both the boards of Zoom, the money remittance business, and Eventbrite, for almost 2 decades. And Roloff is just somebody who can solve a problem in a very creative manner. I mean, of course, he's like a calculator. He was an actuary originally out of university, but yeah, his creative problem solving, and then as seen his investing is like second to none. But he was always somebody that I could have a conversation with and help me find a solution to very very hard problems.
So you go to Stanford, and then if I understand correctly, you go off to school in England. And then after that, you describe yourself as going through a personal crisis of meaning. What do you think triggered that crisis, and how did you kind of work through an emergent?
Well, I think in like at Stanford and Oxford, just took things that were of interest to me, not that would have a bearing directly on, like my trade or what I would be doing the rest of my life. So I came out of Oxford with a master's in history and figured, well, maybe I should just apply to law school, take the LSATs and go that direction. Or I would also interned in a neuro lab and was considering the med school route. But I was basically like kind of at a crossroads and not sure the right direction, what to do. And then, again, maybe you call it dumb luck, but this was right as the first internet boom was happening. And right in the midst of that, I was looking for something that would challenge me, that would have a high degree of intellectual rigor, that I could learn every day from. And, very, in a very fortunate manner, that keys technology right up to me. So I went to Silicon Graphics and became a product manager.
And your first major entrepreneurial endeavor was Zoom. What was kind of the initial insight that led to it, and how did it eventually take shape? Or were the early days like?
Yeah, great question. It was something Mike Moore said. I had been meeting with him the day that PayPal went public, and he said that first PayPal is only in like the second or third inning, and then second that a great company will create industries upon industries. Now it looks like Stripe is that one doing that. That's the massive fintech winner, and so I went to work with my partner Alan Braverman to launch to launch the remittance business. We actually were experimenting around, like much what you see today is that here we had a payments API that we're building different payment apps on top of. Today, you build different apps on top of open AI, not very different at all. It's the same context.
How do you think that kind of experience not only shaped your development as a founder, but what's also one thing you understand now that you wish you understood then?
Well, I think it's always perseverance. Perhaps we should have kept Zoom independent. It was a great exit, but a lot of the small players in the market at the time that were far behind us, are now doing multi-billions in net revenue. I mean, it's staggering how big the remittance market has grown to, and persevering and just keeping going is always hard year in and year out. So that's certainly one that's a like universal lesson here. Look for a big market and steer towards it.
So your second major entrepreneurial endeavor was Eventbrite, and you co-founded it while engaged to your wife. And starting a company with your partner is very unusual. I can't think of anyone else I know who's done that. What made you confident you could grow a business together?
Well, we kind of tested it out. We just went upon building the business, and day in and day out would kind of stop and check in and see, is there friction? Is there conflict? Is something awry? And we just said no. Well, things were working great. Let's keep moving along. And it was it was like maybe the most rewarding experience of my career and in lifetime in general. I think it was so fun building and going through that early stage rapid growth phase with Julia.
I want to shift a little bit to talk about your current endeavor, which is A Star, and talk a little bit about the investment philosophy. What lessons from Zoom, Eventbrite, but then also you were a partner at Founders Fund for some time, kind of shaped your investment philosophy right now, and how would you describe it?
Yeah, there's lots of different methodologies around investing. Um, and A Star is really an amalgamation of all the things I've learned from the Sequoias, the founders funds, and just from meeting and getting to work with so many great founders over the years. So I would say in the case of A Star, we're very talent focused. We are. It's immaterial, practically immaterial what category of business it is. It could be almost any business. If you're an extraordinary founder, we want to be in that seat. And the notion there is the brightest people find the biggest opportunities and capitalize on them. And they usually are opportunities that are overlooked and kind of cast aside, and give that founder some time to build in kind of solitude in a sense. And that's just like a lesson, that's held true. We backed Avi is this kid out of Yale, and he's building General Biological. It's an industrial biotech business that is incredibly out of favor with the investment community. And there was a kind of first generation of these that the majority of them didn't make it. But we see why the why now matters and works now, and then his ability and resourcefulness is extraordinary. So we found ourselves in this market, not because we wanted that narrative or we thought it sounded sexy or it was good for the environment, although it is good for the environment, but because it's extraordinary.
I want to shift back to PayPal for a minute because kind of talking about people and talent, you weren't necessarily at PayPal or part of the PayPal Mafia, but you were kind of alongside it, which I think is a very interesting perspective. So from your vantage point, what made not only PayPal, but the people inside of it so successful?
PayPal special is that Peter had a special opportunity to recruit far in advance of the creation and recruiting of PayPal itself. While at Stanford, he found all these brilliant misfits and put them through the ringer. Keith and David and then Reed on the more liberal side, but was able to see all these and and understand all these contrarian thinkers. And so when he founded PayPal with Max Levchin, and that was the other key piece, is finding a brilliant, relentlessly driven Max. Max is phenomenal. From UIUC at the time, it was the top school for CS, and so associated with the internet and Mozilla and so on. They really shouldn't have been not so nice to Mark Andreessen. That hurt them quite a bit. But that that combo was amazing. And then Peter's
Let's say you're talking to me right now and I'm a founder and looking to back me per se. What are the kind of common questions you ask, or what are some unique questions you ask when speaking with the founder, and what are the general things you look for out of those questions?
I like to say it's not an employment interview, and so you're not restricted by law in California to questions. And so I can ask about your family. I can ask. I want to find out, what made you. Like, you're in high school and you're spending your time like doing this on the side and learning. So like, where did this come from? Where did this desire come from? Like, what are your parents' professions? Do you have siblings? Like, what are your siblings doing? And you can often look for these signs, of like competitiveness, of drive, of grit. And those are the things that we're all trying to figure out, because we have to make a decision in very short amount of time for many millions of dollars.
You've worked in partnerships. Both of your kind of bigger entrepreneurial endeavors were partnerships, and you've worked in partnerships throughout your career. Do you prefer to back companies with co-founders?
I do. I'm not as strict about it as, say YC, and I would imagine YC. I meant to ask Hartz the other day. I wonder if they're going to move away from it. This, we don't back single founders. It is hard to do this on your own, and I think very important to have a partner and somebody that's got your back and somebody that's going to help balance you out and get you through the hard times. So, we prefer it, but it's not a rule. Like Ethan Thornton, the founder of Mock Industries, is a solo founder, and he's incredible. And I'd back him 100 times over. Like, and he's doing it entirely on his own. He started at age 19, dropped out freshman year from MIT to build this defense tech business, and he's relentless.
When meeting with a person, and you kind of mentioned you like to learn about not necessarily the company, but first kind of the person, learning about their background, their family, all that kind of stuff. How fast do you generally know if this is someone you want to back or not?
Oh gosh, I'd say before 10 minutes in. Yeah, it really shines through kind of out the gates. So it's not to say there's like the quieter, like softer spoken super talent. I put Ben Silverman there as like a quieter force that's not banging his fist or super energized, but an absolute brilliant product person.
And I have one more question about kind of venture before we go into a little bit of perspective and some advice. What do you think is the most overrated trait investors look for in founders, and what's the most underrated?
Overrated trait in founders, what would be that? What would be an overrated trait? I don't know if I have a good answer for that. That's so interesting. I don't want to. I mean, I'm. You know what? I think I would say, like, it is a great benefit to have an engineering background. but some investors still only require it. And some of the best founders of our time don't have
Yeah.
engineering backgrounds or in tech. In the olden days, that was much more set in stone. You had to be, an engineer to set foot in the room for it.
What's the most underrated?
I mean, I think underrated wise, I don't see investors talking as much about how a relentless founder who keeps going and keeps pushing forward, really has the right, effect here. I'm not in perplexity, but I just reading the Wall Street Journal before this, and he's trying to buy Chrome for
34.5 billion.
34.5 billion. And he is just he's relentless, and he's in a competitive space, a very competitive space with some big players, and he's a relentless example.
And actually, how I heard your name, an example of a relentless founder, is my friend Patrick O'Shaughnessy hosts a podcast, Invest Like the Best, and Ram Tim Naimi was on there, and he seems like a relentless person. And he, went bankrupt, I think, at 26, and now he runs Abstract, and he mentioned you as one of his kind of mentors, someone that's guided him along the way. So I think it's
Love Ram Tim.
It's an example. I want to move on to a little bit of a perspective question before going into a little bit of advice. But it's a very broad question, and you can break this down how you want, but which industries or technologies do you think will have the biggest impact on the world in the next decade?
I generally try not to make predictions.
Yeah.
I tend to follow the evidence because it always surprises us. I don't think anyone except for Elon saw what was going to happen with space and in that direction, or even electric cars. I hope it's around energy. I hope it's around fusion, that we find an inexpensive, plentiful source. So that's really, where there's more investments and a lot of bright people out there. We're small investors in a company called Fuse, and that's where our bet is. But we hope, that big problem gets solved. It's almost critical for humanity.
What impact do you ultimately hope to have on the world?
Well, I want to keep building and helping founders build great businesses that, and those businesses can have a really terrific impact on lives. I was a little disillusioned. I came out of Stanford excited around politics, and we all see what happens. Things go one way, and then they flip back the other, and you sometimes just make no forward progress. But when you can build and improve the lives of others. In the case of Zoom, the money remittance business, it was an industry that was really backward. It was run by two kind of oligopolies, Western Union and MoneyGram, and they were policing immigrants. And we changed that, and the market's very different today where we are.
This is one last question I like to have every single guest. So I'm 15. If you were to give one piece of advice to a 15-year-old today, what would it be?
One piece of advice would be keep looking for where you find the most intellectual curiosity and passion, and just keep following towards that. And then I'm going to say two. And the second one is to find your own Peter Thiel. Where are those where are those folks out there?
Well, it's been a pleasure, Kevin. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, Amir. Great to meet you.